Now we're going to talk about select and mask. We've been talking about masking, and hopefully you have a good feel for it. If it's still a little bit fuzzy, then hopefully this video will help. I'm going to be looking at the four images that you have available to you to download from the page. And the first two that we're going to look at is Put Mustache on Me and then Mustache. Now, as you can imagine, you probably know what we're going to do. We're going to take the mustache from this dorky looking guy and put it on this young woman here, and she's going to have a nice big old mustache. The trick is to not make it look cheesy, to make it look like it is really her mustache. Now, we don't quite have all the tools to really dial in the mustache on this image because we still need to understand how to work with adjustment layers because the skin color of this guy, especially around the mustache. I mean, take a look at this like cheesy grin here, but notice how yellow and orange it is around the mustache. Whereas the skin color on this woman here is much lighter and certainly not nearly as yellow or orange. And so we just take the mustache. I mean, I'll show you. I'm just going to grab a rectangle here and copy, and I'll paste it for a second. And look at the difference in skin color. You can see the difference in skin color is significant. In fact, as graphic designers, working with skin color is one of the most difficult things that we do. So we would need to add an adjustment layer to dial in the skin color. We're going to see how to do that next video. You probably already have had some experience with adjustment layers, but suffice it to say for this example, I realize that we are not going to be perfect. We're not going to dial in the skin color, but we are going to find a way to make that mustache look pretty decent. So instead of the rectangular selection that I originally did, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. One way is to grab a big selection area, and it doesn't matter, it could have actually been that rectangle, but give myself enough pixels outside of what I want selected, in this case the mustache, to work with. And so I'm going to copy, and then I'm going to paste, and I'm going to position it, grab the move tool, and it's a little hard to position in size here because I can't see her face underneath. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to dial down the opacity temporarily so I can see the face underneath too. So I get to see the mustache and the face. Now, another thing I'm going to do right away is rename the layer Mustache. So taking a look here now, I'm going to place that mustache in the area that I want it to be. And I'm using the arrow keys to nudge it left and right, up and down. You ought to try that. It's kind of cool. So I kind of put it right there. All's really nice. I'm going to dial up the opacity. Now what I'm going to do is add that layer mask that I've done in the past. Boom. Grab the paintbrush tool. Make sure I have black selected. And then I'm going to dial down the brush. That's the left bracket key. And you'll notice as I paint over it, I get this hiding of the mustache guy. And it's starting to get pretty close. Now I'm going to dial down the brush even a little bit more so I can get a little bit closer. And I can sort of take my time and paint this in. And as you can see, it will get pretty close. I'm getting her nose back here for a second rather than his nose, right? You see that? Getting her nose in there. Okay. And It's good to dial in the hardness. A lot of times, by the way, I just right-clicked and dialed in the hardness, hit the return key to sort of dial in the nose area there. And by the way, notice if I overdo it, look, oh man, I painted too much. No problem. I just switch colors down here at the bottom left. I switch colors. Now I paint with white, and I paint with white. I'm painting with white on that layer mask. Look over there on the layers palette. I'm painting with white on that layer mask, and I'm bringing back the pixels that are on top. So you can always go back and forth, switch. By the way, if you really want to do it quickly, it's the X key. The X key switches between those two foreground and background colors. So anyway, I'm painting with black, and then I'm dialing that in. Now there is another trick I want to show you here, and that is, don't get confused with the opacity of the layer. Look over here in the layers palette on the right. That's the opacity of the layer. We already did that. I can, up here in the options bar with the brush, have the opacity of the brush dialed down. If I dial down the opacity of the brush, then when I'm painting with black, I'm actually not painting with 100% black, so it's not hiding all of the pixels, it's only hiding some of the pixels. In this case, since I've got an opacity, let me make it easier to understand. If I have an opacity of 50%, now, when I paint with this paintbrush, it's hiding 50% of the pixels. I went and I painted with an opacity of 50%, the color black on the layer mask, and it only hid 50% of the pixels. Now, what's really cool is if I go back again, another 50% gets hidden. Again, another 50%. And so I have this ability to sort of massage things in. The lower I dial down that opacity, the less I'm hiding pixels. I'm hiding just a few pixels. I've dialed it down to 10% and done some really fine detail work, going over and over again, hiding just little bits, a little amount of pixels at a time. I'm going to paint all of those back, so I'm going to hit the X key. I'm going to dial up the opacity of the brush, get all that back for a second, and then sort of finish this out, getting back her nose. I'm painting with white now. Now I hit the X key and I'm painting, oops, sorry. Hit the X key, I'm painting with black now, and I'm hiding as much of that yellow as I can of the skin color. Got some of that over here, smaller brush. And so you can see I can mess with this a little bit. And then I'm going to zoom out here to 100%, and that looks okay. Not perfect, but it looks okay. All right, so that's one way of doing it. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to come back to the mustache here, and there is another way to do it. You've probably figured it out. You can grab another selection tool. In this case, I'm going to choose the quick selection tool, and I'm going to select and click and get this mustache area here, and that's pretty close. All right. And by the way, I don't want this nose area, so I'm going to hold down the Option key, which gives me a minus, and I get rid of some of that area right there. I'm still holding down the Option key. And there I go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Select and Mask mode. There we go. I'm in the Select and Mask mode, and you can see over here in the Select and Mask mode, there is a scroll bar, and there's a lot of function and features available to me in here. I have a view where I can view it on an onion skin, which means it'll show me part of the background. I can view it like it's a selection. I can view it like it's quick mask mode. I can view it so it's on black. I can view it so it's on white. And I can view sort of an outline view or on any layers. In this case, I don't have any layers in the background, so that's not working. But I tend to like to view it either on black if I'm going on a dark background, or on white if I'm going on a lighter background. For right now, I'm going to view it on white, and then I'm just going to click here again to close it, and I've got a slider on how much white I see or how much I don't see. And now what I can do is come over here, and there's this tool over here called the Refine Edge Brush tool. And what that does is that allows me to grab a brush, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, and I'm going to just click around the edges and drag. And what Photoshop is trying to do is Photoshop is trying to figure out what are the edges. And so it works pretty good with hairline if that's all you're trying to get. So I'm trying to get the hairlines here, and so I'm just going around. I'm lifting up on the mouse every once in a while, but I'm just trying to get the hairline, and Photoshop seems to be doing a decent job. I'm getting a little bit of skin there, but I can come back and get that later by painting on the layer mask, and you'll notice there that that did a pretty decent job. So taking a look over here into the right on the properties palette, now I'm going to scroll down, and you'll see at the bottom here it says output settings. I'm going to turn that down, scroll down again, and it's going to tell me what I can output it to. A selection, which you're used to, it's like the marching ants. I can output it to a layer mask, a new layer, etc. I'm going to output this to a layer mask. Click on that, then hit OK, and now notice that the select and mask mode created a layer mask based upon my selection. So I'm going to take this guy right here, I'm going to drag the layer over to the put mustache on me and drop it in there, grab the move tool, move that into position, and I'm going to zoom up on it, and now I'm going to click over on the layers palette, and I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool. And remember, I'm on the the layer mask. I'm on the layer mask. I should name that, by the way. I'm going to name it Mustache. I'm click on the layer mask of the mustache layer, targeting that layer, grab the paintbrush, paint with black, and I'm going to get just a little bit, and I'm going to double check my opacity, because when I start messing with the opacity, sometimes I forget to turn it back to 100, and then I start using it, it's not working right, and I freak out. Oh yeah, then I say, I got to look, and it's been lowered. So I check my opacity, and I'm going to now just adjust some of these areas that are still a little bit weird, and I'm painting on the layer mask, getting that nose back. And there you go. Now I zoom out, and that looks pretty good. Okay, that's another way to do it. So there are two ways to do it. There is the general way I did, where I just made this rough selection, I dropped it in, and I created a layer mask, and then I painted on the layer mask. And then this way, where I used another tool like the quick selection tool, and I went into the select and mask mode, and I used the refine edge brush tool to help determine the edges of this hair area. The refine edge brush tool is very good for that. So next up, we're going to continue with the Refine Edge brush tool. And I just want to show you one thing about the Refine Edge brush tool that is going to benefit you. Here I have a woman. I want to select her, and I want to put her in this cityscape as if she's running in there. And you'll notice that I've got a combination of selection issues that I have to deal with here. Unlike the previous one with the mustache, all I cared about was the hair of the mustache. Here, I care about the hair on her head, but I also care about the edges of her body line as well. And sometimes when you're trying to work with both of those at the same time, it can get a little bit difficult. So I have a technique that I like to do first, and that is I first make sure that I select all of the body lines, the harder edges, the finer edge selections first. I get that dialed in before I start messing with the hair and the refined brush tool. And I also forgot to tell you, we do have a select subject. See up in the options bar here? When I choose a selection tool, you can choose the select subject, click on it, and Photoshop is going to try to figure out the subject. And in this case, it's a pretty good starting point. Not bad at all. If I zoom in, you'll notice we're missing some of the air here, the sky here. That's because the t-shirt area, the chest area here, and the sky are pretty close. So Photoshop couldn't quite figure that out, but it did a pretty good job here. So I'm going to go into the select and mask mode. By the way, if you can't see the select and mask mode, it means you don't have a selection tool selected. That's okay. You can still always get it by going to the select menu and choose select and mask. All right, so I'm going to go into the select and mask mode, and this time I'm going to go up here and I'm going to view it on black. And I'm going to dial down the black a little bit so I can kind of see these edges. And I'm going to zoom up, Command plus. And so you'll see some of these edges here where some of them are okay. Some of them, the hair, we've got a lot of problems with the hair. And see how that's sort of got some jaggies in it? So what I want to do is I want to start taking care of all this body area first and then do the hair last. So one of the ways I can do that is I can look at this arm area, for example, and dial up the smoothness a little bit. And you notice that sort of smooths the arm out of a little bit. And you see around the legs area and stuff like that. So that smoothness helps a lot around these edges of her face and stuff like that. In fact, that did a pretty good job. There's not a lot more I actually need to do on this, but I am going to zoom in on it and I'm going to look around at the edges and make some adjustments to some of these areas. Now, if you're really, really detailed, you're going to see some of these areas, and I'm going to go grab the paintbrush tool, and you'll notice that if I oops, I got it the wrong way here. I'm adding to the selection. I want to subtract from the selection. So there's the paintbrush tool up in the upper left-hand corner. Boom, I'm subtracting from the selection. And again, I can use this paintbrush tool to sort of just subtract that area. That's nice. Command minus, zoom around, look around, right in the crotch area here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use the paintbrush tool. And if we get a little bit inside, it's no big deal. We're not going to see that. And look around. Now, you don't have to get this detailed, but if you're doing real professional work, then you would. I just want you to understand sort of how this works. So I'm taking the time here and I'm fixing that. Sometimes you can use, you don't have to paint. Let me take a couple steps back here. Sometimes the quick selection tool will work for you. I click in that area. I'm adding, I need to subtract. Click in that area, and it does a pretty good job sometimes. And maybe not. So this is why a lot of times I'm going to paint. So going back to the paintbrush, I'll get a little bit bigger of a brush here. I'll make sure it's a little bit harder, or a little bit softer, I should say. And there we go. Now I'm going to paint these edges really quickly. And if it's not perfect, it just means I don't want to take the time to paint this perfectly. If it was a real client and I was really doing it, I'd get a little bit more detailed. But for the sake of this video, I don't want you to watch me paint for hours. All right, so I'm looking around. I don't really care about that white right there for now. Here's an area again where I could fix. It's the chest area. And remember, I am subtracting from the selection here. And as you can see, painting around. And by the way, if you have a digitizing tablet with a pen, it can work better as well. All right, so I'm going to add a little bit of shoulder there. So I'm going to go come up here and add to it, bring back some of the shoulder. And as you can see, I'm going around and everything's pretty cool. In here now, I'm not going to worry about the hair because I'm going to use the Refine Edge tool. But again, what I wanted you to do is realize that we're going to dial her in first before I use the Refine Edge tool. Now, once I've dialed her in, I'm going to grab that Refine Edge tool and I'll zoom in a little bit and get the brush. And you'll notice I'm sort of halfway in, halfway out, kind of going over the edges and going over these wispy areas, over the edges here. And I could even get a little bit of a bigger brush here and cover these areas right here. Hold down the space bar, move it around, get these wispies, even inside where there's white. You'll notice that Photoshop is kind of doing a pretty decent job. It's not perfect. And there are actually some other tools out there that you can buy that will do a little bit better job than this. Kind of the same idea, a little bit better job, but you get the idea. And this is going to do a pretty decent job, especially because we're going to be putting it on white. Now you'll notice right here it kind of took out the skin. So I'm going to come back and get that, but let me just finish this out first. And I'm probably going to take out a little bit of the neck too when I do that here. Okay, so I'm painting with that refine edge brush tool and refining the edge as much as possible, getting these wispies even here. And lastly, I'm going to go back to the paintbrush, make sure I subtract from the selection. Make sure I add to the selection and get that arm area back. Too much. Undo. Get that arm area back a little bit. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out, and that's pretty decent. You're going to see it's going to look pretty good when I get it into the other image. So I'm going to slide down. I'm going to output to, instead of a selection, layer mask, hit OK, and then I'm going to drag that layer, go over to my cityscape, drop it in, grab the move tool, move her into position, and there she is. Okay, that's it for Select and Mask.